Welcome to this edition of Dynamic CISO Talk Show. I'm Rahul Mani, founding director of Trade Media and vice president community engagement and editorial for ISMG. On the show today, we have Brian Barnier, director of analytics at ValueBridge Advisors. Brian is also professor of operations, finance, and economics at the graduate level across several US universities. He has been a guest lecturer in Russia and Mexico and served on the faculty of Wharton, MBA Stonier Graduate School of Banking. Prior to ValueBridge Advisors, Brian led teams in 9 US patents in technology with AT&T, Nokia, and IBM. In 2021, he earned the coveted Joseph J. Wasserman Award presented by ISACA for outstanding achievement in information technology, risk, governance, and security. In today's episode, we will extensively talk about various dimensions of risk management, and there's no better person to talk about it than Brian. Welcome to the talk show, Brian.
Delighted to be here. So nice to be with you all.
Thank you. Pleasure is all ours. Talk a little bit about yourself before we dive deep into the conversation.
Well, the thing that's most relevant to me for cybersecurity is that I come out of a systems background. Some people come out of a accounting auditing background, and I come out of a systems background. So systems are like you and I are using right here, all our internet connections, aviation, music, cooking, sports, all these kinds of dynamic activities are the world that I come out of with a systems thinking approach, and then an industrial strength design thinking approach to cybersecurity. So that's really what defines myself and my background.
Well, that's pretty unique, at least, from a conversation point of view. I haven't come across too many people with this kind of background. So in the context of growing digital dependencies and the disruptions we saw in last couple of years, where do you find the overall debate on organizations' risk appetite and also their capabilities to manage risks? Where were the organizations found totally caught unawares?
Yeah, it really comes down to those two different backgrounds that people tend to have. I mean, cybersecurity is a young discipline. So some people just stumble into cybersecurity, without a lot of formalized training, some certificates. Some people come from IT operations, some come from application development. And then again, we've got people that are coming in from audit backgrounds, a lot of ex-military people come into the space because of the cybersecurity and cyber warfare. And so it's really those two different views that are trying to get reconciled. And that's why we talk about critical thinking, and that goes all the way back to Socrates and asking questions. Systems thinking, again, like all those things we mentioned before, airplanes and everything else. And then design thinking, but not just design thinking that does user experience or, writes better warnings for an anti-phishing email, but it's that industrial strength design thinking that gave us airplanes, that gives us these electronics we're using right now, that gave us the automobile assembly line, Henry Ford, the steam engine, the search engine, all these sorts of things. That's that industrial strength design thinking that we're trying to bring to cybersecurity and trying to unite these two different perspectives on cybersecurity.
Well, excellent. The more we discuss about risks, the more complex it appears as many dimensions are added to it, and there is a limited understanding to handle those different dimensions. How can the complexity be separated from processes to have a clearer picture and also define a better path or process of risk management?
That's the beauty of putting people back in the center of cybersecurity. people have been taken out of the center of cybersecurity for in the US for about 15 years now, since the mid 2000s. And we have adversarial things like lines of defense. Well, that's great if you're trying to catch an employee with a name badge cheating on their expense account, or accelerating their sales booking so they can get bigger checks, right? But it's no good when you're trying to deal with some external adversary coming from who knows where for a state purpose or just a commercial purpose. So it's putting people back in the center of cybersecurity is so important. We think about the burnout. We think about people feeling like they're on a hamster or gerbil wheel is something I hear often, right? And this is where the critical thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking comes in. Because what they have done for decades, if not centuries, right, is those approaches have simplified things. Think about steam engine, right, over 2 centuries old. And we use systems thinking to simplify that so that the user of the steam engine and now the automobile, by whatever method of propulsion, doesn't need to know every single thing that's in the automobile. Some people like to have dashboards that give them more information. Some people don't, right? So it's the systems thinking and the design thinking that are the simplifiers of complexity. And they've been that way for thousands of years. I mean, going way back to like building the Egyptian pyramids. Make sense? You're on mute.
You've been emphasizing on these two terms, system thinking and design thinking, a lot, Brian, and I'll come to you to get a lot more elaboration on these two. However, a question that is puzzling me right now is when we are talking of such a vast and wide area, do you think that the people who manage risks or the people who are assigned to manage risks in their organizations, are those people appropriate? I mean, are those people appropriately chosen to do the task?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And my co-author and colleague and co-founder in Think Design Cyber, Prachi Kale, she has given this a lot of thought. And the piece there is that today's cyber system is letting people down. It's letting people down because they don't have the kind of supportive environment around them that's designed for, say, pilots in airplane cockpits, right? When you've got a pilot, they're concerned about cognitive overload. How many things does a pilot have to pay attention to at any one time? They're concerned about the design of the cockpit. So in one case, the pilot doesn't bump something with their knee and cause the plane to do something odd. We saw this in the 737 MAX as well, where you had the issue of the controls. And so we're trying to simplify things for pilots so they can do a better job. The same thing goes for medical professionals and people in all kinds of areas. Chemical safety, this is well documented, making it easier for people. But what is it in cybersecurity? Cybersecurity, all the emphasis on point technical solutions, not very well coordinated together, not put in, say, a zero trust strategy context. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that they're looking at partial data. And so this would, flunk a statistics, introductory course, but because they're only looking at convenient data or parts of data or whatever they can easily put on the monitor. And then they're throwing away a bunch of event log data, right? That's a big issue in zero trust. They're not watching packets on the network. It's not about people, it's about packets when you're trying to do zero trust. And so they're focusing their emphasis there, but what are they doing? They're missing all of that care and feeding of people. So it's chronically burned out. They're not getting critical thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking. Again, think about all the consumer products we use every day that we love and corporate innovation labs. And domain-specific training, right? You've got it for people in operations, people in the customer service center, you've got it for salespeople. All these people have got domain-specific training, just like sports, right? Why would you have, a North American football coach if you're training a cricket team in India? Makes no sense. But we lack domain-specific coaching for people as individuals and as leaders of diverse, high-performing teams. And so when those things fail, when these big training gaps are out there, that's why cyber people struggle. And that's part of the root cause, right? Think of the Ishikawa fishbone diagram, the root cause for all these incidents in cybersecurity. We're letting people down.
No, exactly. And the more you are talking about it, and as I think at the back of my mind, maybe because of some compliance requirements or statutory requirements, there is a set of people put to manage risks. Whether they are equipped or not is to anybody's imagination. And in many occasions, I have seen that risk management is rolled up to a CISO who may not be very equipped to handle risks. So my next question to you is, should various types of risks, for example, operational risk, cyber risk, business risk, should they be looked separately? If not, then how can there be a single pane of glass to look at them and create a better risk assessment and risk mitigation strategy for an organization?
Well, so there's two questions here. One is about the risk approach, and the other is about the technology enablement, the single pane of glass. To the first piece, it's all about the system, right? So it's the environment in which the business lives, including all the threat attackers, but it's also the hurricanes, it's the geopolitical risk, it's everything else. And some of these interrelate with each other, right? Like we've got geopolitical risk causing supply chain problems and geopolitical risk causing cybersecurity problems. All these pieces are in play. So we need to look at that as an environment. And the way the systems look at this is they look at an environment and they look at capabilities within that environment. Again, think about an airplane. Some airplanes would get destroyed flying through a hurricane. Other planes are designed to do it and flown by weather services through the hurricane, right? Because they're trying to collect information and they get a bumpy ride, but the plane is structurally fine. Other planes would be totally destroyed. So environment and capabilities is a key systems thought. Now we come over to the visualization of that to help people make better decisions. And some disciplines are farther ahead than others. For example, I advise a company called Disaster Tech here in the US. And their catchphrase is they're a single pane of glass for just the words you used, for all kinds of risk relating to emergencies. And they're used by municipalities and by insurance companies and by businesses that have got risk of hurricane and things like that. At any kind of weather events and more. And they're trying to integrate this information and put it into a workflow, a team flow, so that people can interact with it. So they've got that. In cybersecurity, because of these piece parts that we live in, we don't have the same picture, right? Our friend John Kindervag is building a piece of software to help with that from the zero trust perspective. But building that out is something that they're working on. So it's a great start, but building it out is to go. It's not as mature as it is in other industries.
So very interesting point you just raked up, Brian. And when we talk of identifying those risks which are obvious and which are very accidental and non-obvious, it includes a whole host of things, which starts from climate-related risks, environmental risks, social erosion, social risks. Uh, we saw COVID, and nobody imagined that this could rake up such a large issue. Natural disasters, there and geopolitical that you just mentioned, confrontations. It could be geopolitical and geoeconomic both. Now, how does an organization, or how do organizations, factor in everything? And it is a developing story. It's not a static story.
Well, you sort of answered your own question with the word story. So what we do is we do scenario analysis, and we do those in outcomes accelerator workshops, where the objective is to do 6 months of work in 6 weeks. And we do movie script style scenarios, because think about all the things that you just mentioned, right? We had the Spanish flu in 1918, and public health agencies, you can look them up online, and it all came out after COVID, had been running exercises on these things for years, but just nobody paid attention to them. And geopolitical risk, we've been writing about that for, again, decades. And not enough people took it seriously. So all these kinds of things, and that's why when I talk about emerging technology risk, and somebody says, oh, microprocessors in a car. I said, when was the first microprocessor in the car? And a lot of people don't know, but it was in 1968. And it was in the Volkswagen that was used as Herbie the Love Bug in the Disney movie, 1968, right? And people are talking about AI and ML. When was AI and ML come into being? Well, the AI term was coined in 1956, and the ML term was coined in 1959. This is not new, right? This has been out there for a long time. And so when I do these outcome accelerator workshops, I ask people to write down emerging risks, emerging threats. Yeah. And then I ask them, at a coffee and cookie break to go online. And every single one of them is decades old. It has been there for a while. It's just that finally, they've noticed it, or it's come to, popular news media attention. So that's the power of doing these scenarios. When we look at things like SolarWinds or the TJX breach or the Target breach, all of these things that go against infrastructure, all of those have been themes in heist films for years. I mean, you think of Ocean's 11, the one with George Clooney, but remember that was a remake of the 1960 film that had Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Andy Dickinson in it, right? So this has been out there for a long, long time before most hackers were even born. And that's why just watching Netflix and eating popcorn, hackers can get ideas, because the cyber teams are not thinking as creatively as they are.
No, it's very fascinating, Brian, and you've said it very rightly that we fail to study scenarios. We fail to assess how the amplification of a particular scenario, which may not be as prevalent today, can take a different shape tomorrow. And there are various examples. And you said it, artificial intelligence is not new, machine learning is not new, and these things have been developing. So, taking a leaf out of the entire risk management discussion, if we are to talk about cyber risks, especially in the context of today's hyper digitization, what could be the right way of quantifying that cyber risk? What are the key criteria to work on?
Well, let's go back to putting people in the center in those scenario analysis workshops, right? I've got a very good friend who's in the midst of the Bollywood industry. And it's that kind of thing, right? And when we are empowering people with, one, the skills they need, and two, are designing systems around them notice I used design, okay, that's design thinking, and systems that support them, like airplane pilots, like surgeons, like so many other people, like bus drivers, right? We don't want to overload a bus driver, they're going to hit somebody on the street. So when we start doing that, putting people in the center and surrounding them with that creativity, then we can also do the quantification. So when I do it in these outcomes accelerator workshops, we've got, 30, 40 people in the room. We've got, round tables of 8. Each team, will pick a movie genre and they'll sort of sort themselves out. And I try to have diverse teams around each one. So different types of skills and backgrounds. And then they start developing scenarios. And then from those scenarios, they start developing the plausibility and they start quantifying these things that before they thought they could never quantify, because really it's behavioral. And the use of statistics in doing various kinds of analyses categorically miss the behavioral aspects. And I've done a number of LinkedIn posts on that. So that's why it is so important to do those scenarios, just like people do geopolitical scenarios, in high stakes situations, or they do them for fun to make a film that everybody wants to watch.
That's very, very interesting. I mean, behavioral sciences is such an integral part of, or should be such an integral part of your risk strategy. And until recently, people didn't realize it much. So coming on to a point which you have mentioned in most of your talks and writings, you've said that in cybersecurity, one doesn't have to be on the wrong side of asymmetric warfare. Instead, one needs to outthink adversities with design thinking. Now, here comes the aspect. Design thinking in cybersecurity is, to me, is a quite a fascinating emerging area. I mean, explain to us, how does this work as opposed to the conventional or lateral thinking?
So the quote that you just read brings together Eastern and Western design thinking, because the outthink your enemies comes from the famous Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, or Sun Wu, as his name is more properly. And then the design thinking pieces, as I mentioned a moment ago, they go back to this millennia old interplay between designers and engineers, right? So think about the pyramids, right? Think about concrete, especially the Roman innovations in concrete. Think about purple dye from shellfish, right? All of these things, you had the engineers extracting the purple dye, and you had the designers doing clothing for royalty, right? Out of that mix. And it's been that way all through time. And we look through all kinds of design movements, back, especially through the last, say, 2.5, 3 centuries. And, there's big ones in fashion and art, but look at, stylized locomotives or industrial design in coffee pots and cars. You can go online to the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, and you can see this whole collection of industrial design they have. So it's that kind of notion where you're bringing people together and bringing these cultures together and these diverse teams where you're mixing. I'd like to bring in pure designers even, right? And mix them in rooms. I once brought in a gentleman who was a judge of film scripts in Hollywood, right? But he was in an association and he was rotating to a job where he was going to be the manager of the technology for that association. So he was sharing design with these people in Hollywood, and the technology people in Hollywood were telling him about this team that he was going to manage because he just came vice president of the Film Association. So it's this wonderful interplay of these diverse, high-performing teams. And that's what's so powerful. That simplifies complexity, that clarifies things, that empowers people, that cuts waste, that gives efficiency. It flattens all these point solutions that, our friend John Kindervag calls expense and depth. that people is just the beautiful thing with all these proven and practical techniques over the years. Am I answering the question?
Oh yeah, brilliantly. What I'm understanding from this conversation is that there is a requirement for a lot of out-of-box thinking. We have been very conventional in our approach, and therefore we confront more failures. So before I let you go, one last question, unless you have more to say about this. You have said that unless a systems and root cause analysis approach is used, any risk statistics will be defective because they simply don't reflect reality of the system. Can you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, and we can use any of the examples, right? It's, driving your car down the road, music performance, a cricket match, world football, whatever it is, airplanes. Because in order to understand the risk, you have to understand all these individual dynamics, right? The plane's flying through the sky. You've got the cognitive overload on the pilots. You've got air traffic control telling them what to do. You may have the passenger in the back of the plane having a medical emergency and forcing an early landing. You may have weather systems that are, causing planes, and you see it as you land. They circle the storm and come in from another side. Whatever it is, you've got those external things. And then you have what's happening in the airplane itself. I mean, one time I was on a plane and there was a water leak, right? And they wanted to deal with the water leak and they were concerned about it. I mean, just from the faucets. And so all of these features come together, and that's why we need to understand the system. And here's the key point. Cybersecurity is a complex, dynamic, sometimes adaptive, often chaotic, and certainly highly adversarial system. And I show that in workshops by people just taking paper airplanes, folding a paper airplane, setting it on a table, and saying, okay, here's the airplane at rest. And now we're just going to take a paper airplane and throw it through the air. And just because of the air handlers in the room and the heating and the air conditioning and the movement of people around the room, everybody tosses in their hands, right? Everybody's airplane goes someplace else, right? They don't all land in the same spot. So that is a very basic demonstration of a complex, adaptive, chaotic system. Now, when I have somebody stand there and bat at the paper airplanes, that makes it adversarial, trying to knock them down. So when we bring in auditing procedures that are designed for internal control for financial reporting, as I mentioned earlier, that's a linear, stable system in a general ledger piece of software with very rigid accounting rules to keep, you and I from overspending at breakfast. We can't order the jumbo breakfast. We have to order the breakfast at the meal limits, right? So that is a category error, a huge, terrible category error to take methods designed for auditing a linear, stable system and applying them to a complex, adaptive, chaotic, and adversarial system, highly adversarial system, right? Because it's not just a person with a name badge trying to cheat on their breakfast order or accelerate their sales or whatever it is. This is somebody that's trying to do you harm, trying to turn off medical devices in your hospital, trying to damage your water supply, all these things that are out there on the horizon. And that is this core error. And we solve that by putting people in the center of the process and empowering those people with that critical thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking knowledge. We make their lives easier. And then we can start getting a handle on this stuff, just like we have in so many other risk disciplines where we do not see airplanes falling out of the sky every day. That's where we want to be.
Extremely important to understand, by our listeners that whatever technology you deploy, unless the people are put in the center of everything, nothing will succeed the way it should. And that's the kind of closing message that I'm leaving this discussion with. It was extremely wonderful talking to you, Brian. I think I'll have more opportunities to talk to you in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm pleased to be here and look forward to talking with you in the future.
Absolutely.
All the best.
Thank you.